We always talk about how World War II was won, but what if the real story is about how it was lost? In this explainer, we're going to dive into 3 critical mistakes. Blunders, really, that didn't just change the course of a few battles. Nope, they completely sealed the fate of the Axis powers.
So let's just set the scene for a second. It's early 1942. The Axis powers are, well, they're on top of the world. The Nazi war machine has its grip on pretty much all of Europe, all the way from the beaches of France to the suburbs of Moscow. And over in the Pacific, the Japanese Empire is a juggernaut, just rolling over everything in its path. For them, victory didn't just feel possible, it felt inevitable.
So how on earth did a winning hand like that just completely fall apart? Well, that's what we're here to figure out. We're going to zero in on 3 catastrophic turning points: Pearl Harbor, Stalingrad, and D-Day. And you're going to see this pattern emerge, a nasty cocktail of arrogance, obsession, and some really, really bad calls that brought the whole thing crashing down.
All right, first up, let's head to the Pacific. We're talking about an attack that was, without a doubt, a tactical triumph. But at the same time, it was one of the biggest strategic blunders in the history of warfare.
You've really got to understand the corner Japan was in. They're building this massive empire, right? But a war machine like that runs on one thing above all else: oil. And when the US slaps them with an embargo, bam, 90% of their oil supply is gone, just like that. They were completely backed into a corner. So their logic was pretty straightforward, if incredibly risky. We need that oil in Southeast Asia, and the only thing stopping us is the American fleet sitting right there at Pearl Harbor. And right here, this was the gamble. This was the massive miscalculation. Japan thought one knockout punch would be enough to scare America, to keep them out of the war. But the reality? It did the exact opposite. The attack didn't scare America, it made it angry. It united the entire country with this incredible sense of purpose, and, crucially, it woke up the full, terrifying power of American industry. But the mistake was even bigger than that. You see, the Japanese commander, a guy named Nagumo, he got nervous about a counterattack, so he called off a 3rd wave of bombers. That single decision was a catastrophe for Japan. They missed the giant fuel tanks, the shipyards needed for repairs, the submarine base, and the real kicker? They missed all 3 American aircraft carriers, which just happened to be out at sea. Those carriers were the future of naval warfare, and they were completely untouched.
And the craziest part is the man who planned the whole thing, Admiral Yamamoto, he knew it was a disaster almost immediately. He'd actually spent time in America. He got it. He knew what the country was capable of, and he understood that this so-called victory had just signed the death warrant for his own empire.
Okay, now let's pivot. We're leaving the sunny Pacific and heading to the frozen, brutal Eastern Front, to a city that would become a household name, a symbol of pure Nazi arrogance and human suffering on a scale that's just hard to imagine: Stalingrad.
The fighting in Stalingrad wasn't even a battle anymore. It was something else entirely. German soldiers called it Rattenkrieg, the Rat War. They were fighting block by block, room by room, even sewer by sewer. The Soviets came up with this tactic they called hugging the Germans. They'd get so close to the enemy lines that the German Air Force couldn't drop bombs without hitting their own guys. It was just absolute butchery.
But honestly, the reason for this disaster, it comes down to Hitler's own ego. He was obsessed with taking the city that was named after his arch-enemy, Stalin. He just couldn't let it go. So when his generals begged him to pull the Sixth Army out before they got trapped, he said no. Flat out, no. Then he made it even worse. He diverted vital air support to North Africa and made this insane promise that he could just fly in all the supplies they needed. It was a complete fantasy, and it was a death sentence for hundreds of thousands of his best soldiers.
And just look at these numbers. It's almost impossible to wrap your head around the scale of it. We start with around 300,000 German and Axis soldiers trapped inside what became known as the Stalingrad Pocket.
After months of relentless horror, the starvation, the freezing cold, the constant combat, that number drops to just 91,000 left to surrender. Their commander, Field Marshal Paulus, finally went against Hitler's orders to fight to the last bullet.
And then, the final number, the number of those men who actually survived the Soviet prison camps and made it home after the war. 6,000. Just 6,000. From an army of 300,000. It's absolutely devastating.
Stalingrad was so much more than just a battle lost. It was a psychological atom bomb. For the very first time, the entire world saw the unstoppable German war machine not just stopped, not just defeated, but completely and utterly annihilated. the spell was broken. And from that point on, Germany was on a long, bloody retreat all the way back to Berlin.
Okay, for our last turning point, we're heading to the Western Front. This is where the Allies decided to crack open Hitler's Fortress Europe. But they weren't just going to use brute force. They were going to use one of the greatest deceptions of all time.
To even have a prayer of success on D-Day, the Allies cooked up this brilliant plan called Operation Fortitude. They literally built a fake army in the south of England. We're talking inflatable tanks, wooden airplanes, the whole shebang. They set it up right across from Pas-de-Calais, the most obvious place to invade. Then, using fake radio messages and double agents, they convinced Hitler that this phantom army was the real deal. They got him looking in the completely wrong direction.
And man, did it work. Because Hitler bought the fake, the Allies were able to throw this overwhelming force, over 150,000 men, onto the beaches of Normandy, where the German defenses were much, much weaker. Germany's toughest tank divisions, they were miles away, just sitting and waiting for an invasion that was never going to happen.
And on the day itself, it just turned into a comedy of errors for the Germans. Get this, when the invasion started, Hitler was asleep, and his staff was too scared to wake him up. No joke. So the powerful panzer tank divisions that could have smashed the landings couldn't move without his direct order. To top it all off, their best general in the area, Erwin Rommel, wasn't even there. He was back in Germany for his wife's birthday. You can't make this stuff up.
By the time the German command finally got their act together, it was way too late. The Allies were on the beach and they were there to stay. The second front was open for business. And just like that, Germany was trapped in a giant vice, squeezed from the west by the Allies and from the east by the Soviets, fighting a two-front war that it had absolutely zero chance of winning.
So let's just pull back for a second and look at the big picture. When you put these three moments side by side, this clear pattern of self-destruction just snaps into focus.
And this, right here, is the key takeaway. Pearl Harbor happened because they totally underestimate America's will to fight. Stalingrad was lost because of one man's pride and stubbornness. And the D-Day landing succeeded because the German leadership was so arrogant they were easily fooled. Every single one of these turning points wasn't just about the Allies being brilliant. It was about the Axis making catastrophic, unforced errors.
So it all leaves you wondering, right? What if? What if that third wave had hit Pearl Harbor's fuel tanks? What if Hitler had just listened to his generals at Stalingrad and allowed a retreat? It's a powerful reminder that these huge, world-changing events often hinge on just a handful of decisions. And it shows you that sometimes a war isn't really won.